If you're wondering why the market is so schizophrenic, I'm going to try to make sense of it for you. Stay tuned. My name's Eric. This is Above My Pay Grade. Let's get into it. So, basically, since the great financial crisis of 2008, every market participant, whether they know it or not, is highly reliant on what the Federal Reserve says on a day-to-day basis. And there's even computers that are, when Jerome Powell speaks today, that are analyzing the tone of his voice and should they sell based off the tone of his voice. Ridiculous. In no way is that a healthy market. But basically, everyone's trying to think, is the Fed going to pivot? Because what they say and what they do are often two different things. And that's why the market is so schizophrenic. Because if Jerome Powell actually follows through with fighting inflation, most economists can figure out what that would lead to. However, the million-dollar question is, will he follow through? So I'll take on a little history lesson of why people don't necessarily trust what the Fed is doing. Going back to 2007, Ben Bernanke, if you remember him, looked like an insurance salesman from Middle Indiana. This guy in 2007 went before Congress, and he was the Fed chair at the time, and he said the subprime mortgage crisis was manageable and that it had no systemic risk. And so Congress dutifully said, oh, okay. And we all know what happened after that. He invented quantitative easing, meaning the Fed printing money and buying assets. And TARP, if you've ever heard of that, Troubled Asset Reserve Something Program, basically buying up assets from banks because they were so over-levered. And I was trying to think of an analogy. It's kind of like a Jenga tower. And the Fed had to come in. The Jenga tower in 2007 was almost about to fall over. So the Fed had to come in and throw more pieces in to make sure it stabilized the Jenga tower or our economy, because it couldn't stand on its own. And so Ben Bernanke was wrong. And years later, he's now, pontificating about what Jerome Powell could do better and writing books and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, he was so wrong that it almost collapsed the United States economy. And that was all on the back of low interest rates for a long period of time. Keep in mind, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be an independent private bank. Yeah, no, they're not. So even though on paper they are, politically, in no way are they. Okay? So then we had Janet Yellen. I think she talks like Kermit the Frog. So Janet Yellen comes along in 2017, and at this point, the Federal Reserve had $4.5 trillion on their balance sheet from quantitative easing. So this quantitative easing that Ben Bernanke came up with, that was, Ben Bernanke himself said, it's going to be temporary, and then we'll sell these assets back into the marketplace once this Jenga tower can stand on its own. Janet Yellen comes in and says, okay, so all these pieces we put into this Jenga tower, we're going to start taking them out one at a time. And she quoted saying, it's going to be like watching paint dry. And the Jenga tower started to shake. The economy is going to fall over, because we're so dependent on, it's not a healthy economy, and it hasn't been for a long time. We're so dependent on the Fed coming in and propping up assets and putting pieces in that Jenga tower that she reversed course. So all the intelligence in the world and all the education didn't tell her that this can't stand on its own. And they don't want to take the medicine. And the medicine is either a depression or recession, because the economy needs to clear out all the bad investments, which means people will lose their jobs, etc. We can't rely on fake money printed by the Fed. But nobody in the Federal Reserve wants that to happen on their watch. So Janet Yellen reverses course. And you're familiar with Janet Yellen today because as we've discussed, the Federal Reserve is an independent private bank that's not politically motivated. And that's why the former Fed chair, Janet Yellen, is now the government Treasury Secretary. Nothing to see here. Okay, it's totally private and there's no political influence on the Federal Reserve whatsoever. Okay, so Kermit the Frog goes back into the government and is now the Treasury Secretary. And now we have Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell, we all saw him say in 2021 and 2020, with conviction, inflation is going to be transitory. Okay? He blamed it on supply chains. And anybody with a modicum of intelligence, and I have like 2 brain cells, could have told you that inflation is not transitory when you pump 40% of all money ever invented by God or man into the economy. So Jerome Powell, with all his wisdom, said, yeah, it's going to be transitory and this money will somehow leave the market. Nope. And so now we have inflation. And everyone is riding on what Jerome Powell says. The market does this because Jerome Powell is trying to say things and not do things. Okay? So if we were to believe Jerome Powell that he's truly trying to fight inflation, which is what he says, and this is why everyone's kind of so schizophrenic, because no one believes him. Because he says he wants to fight inflation. And if you truly wanted to fight inflation, you would do something other than what Jerome Powell is doing, which is raising interest rates by a tiny little percentage, half a point. When you have inflation as high as it is today, you have to raise interest rates higher than the inflation rate to collapse inflation. And that does a lot of other things like collapse the economy. So why are people so reliant on what Jerome Powell is saying? Because the Fed in the last decade and a half has pivoted and been wrong so many times. But what they do has a lot to do with asset prices. If Jerome Powell pivots and says, you know what, I think the economy's safe enough now, we can start putting Jenga pieces back into the pile, because Jerome Powell, what he's trying to do is very slowly, he's not going to take a whole Jenga piece out. He's just going to pull it out a little bit and see what happens. He looks up at the tower, and the tower's going, and Jerome Powell's, oh no, I don't know if I can pull this whole piece out or it'll collapse. Okay, maybe I should put it back in. No, I'm going to pull it out. Okay. And so everyone's kind of reliant on what is he going to do? And he says over and over again, he wants to fight inflation. He doesn't. It's politically unpalatable to have inflation. So I've made a video a while ago why the Fed won't stop inflation, because they're trying to ride this line between economic collapse and inflation, and it's a very hard line to walk. And like I said before, this quantitative easing that Ben Bernanke came up with, that's only grown. And so Jerome Powell's trying to shrink that balance sheet that was $4.5 trillion in 2017 when Kermit the Frog came in and said, we're going to try and lower this and sell these assets back on the marketplace. And she had to reverse course. And now Jerome Powell, with $9 trillion plus on the Federal Reserve balance sheet, is trying to do the same. So if you're wondering, like all of these pundits, so if you turn on financial news, CNBC, everyone talks about the Fed. And why they talk about the Fed so much is because the Fed we have such an unhealthy economy that we are solely and completely reliant on what the Fed does. So asset prices go up when quantitative easing happens and the Fed wants to pump money into the system. And all these politicians are so schizophrenic with how they want to get the vote. Like, what are we going to do? Price controls, stimmy checks. What can we do? And so all these economists are kind of waiting to see, okay, what are they going to do? Because no one believes them. No one believes them. So if you're always hearing kind of schizophrenic takes on what's going on, it's because no one believes these people. So hopefully that made sense of kind of a little bit of history of just the last decade, how much the Federal Reserve has distorted the markets. And they're going to keep trying to keep this Jenga tower aloft and up, but at one point, a strong wind will take this thing over, regardless of if they prop it up or not, unfortunately. So in the meantime, if the Federal Reserve continues on their path, which everyone thinks, I mean, the money bet is Jerome Powell is going to keep raising rates until it doesn't actually fight inflation. It just breaks something in the market that hopefully, if the market crashes, then purchasing power will crash too and inflation will go down. Maybe, maybe not. But then at that point, Jerome Powell will come back in and more quantitative easing and easy money. So that's what most people believe that the Federal Reserve is going to do. Because why? Because they've done it every single time. Anytime there's like heavy pain on the horizon, they're like, uh-oh, time to reverse course. Maybe I should change seats over to the Treasury, like Kermit the Frog did. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you got something out of this. If you have friends or family that like this kind of stuff and don't really understand what's going on, please share this with them. Hit the like button. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.